The silence in the city's most exclusive restaurant wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a predator cornering its prey. At the center table, billionaire industrialist Harrison Blackwood sat like a thundercloud about to burst his displeasure, a palpable force that chilled the air more than the industrial-grade air conditioning. He had made one simple request, a request that should have been trivial in a place that boasted of catering to every global whim. He wanted to conduct his business in Japanese, and nobody, not a single person in the five-star establishment, could speak it. The billionaire was fuming, and an empire was on the line. Then from the shadows, a waitress stepped forward. The Gilded Compass did not cater to the merely wealthy. It curated experiences for the titans of industry, the quiet puppet masters of global finance. Its walls were paneled with dark, century-old mahogany, its floors carpeted in a plush crimson that swallowed sound, and its chandeliers dripped with hand-cut crystal that fractured light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The air smelled of old money beeswax and the faintest, most exquisite hint of truffle oil. Tonight, however, that rarefied air was thick with a tension so sharp it felt like a physical object. At the room's epicenter, table 1 sat Harrison Blackwood. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, with a severe face, a mane of silver-streaked dark hair swept back from his high forehead, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He was not a man who enjoyed a scene, but he was also not a man who tolerated incompetence. Flanking him were his two top executives, Mr. Sterling and Mr. Finch, both looking as though they'd rather be facing a firing squad. They sat ramrod straight, their expensive suits feeling like straitjackets, their gazes fixed anywhere but on their employer. The restaurant's general manager, a perpetually flustered Frenchman named Jean-Pierre Dubois, was currently the object of Blackwood's glacial fury. Dubois was bowing so low, his nose nearly brushed the starched white linen of the tablecloth. "Monsieur Blackwood, I am indescribably sorry." Dubois stammered, his French accent thickening with stress. "It is an oversight, a truly unforgivable oversight. We have staff fluent in 16 languages, but Japanese tonight, our usual concierge who handles such matters, is indisposed." Blackwood did not raise his voice. He never did. His power lay in its chilling restraint. "Mr. Dubois," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "I did not book this private room to be told of your staffing inadequacies. My reservation made 3 weeks ago by my assistant explicitly stated the requirement. My guests will be arriving in 30 minutes. They are from the Yoshida Corporation in Osaka. The final negotiations for a $50 billion merger will happen over this meal. This is not a social dinner. It is the culmination of 2 years of work. The conversation must be conducted in their native tongue without outside translators present. It is a matter of respect, and more importantly, a matter of security. Do you understand the gravity of what your oversight has caused?" Each word was a perfectly polished stone, dropped into a silent pool, its ripples spreading outwards. Sterling visibly swallowed. Finch's knuckles were white where he gripped his water glass. Dubois looked as if he were about to faint. I understand, monsieur. Perhaps a translation service via telephone, an earpiece," he offered weakly. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "So you suggest I conduct one of the most sensitive negotiations of my career with a stranger listening in on a speakerphone? Do you have any concept of corporate espionage, Mr. Dubois? Or are you simply a fool?" The word fool hung in the air, a final, brutal condemnation. Dubois' face crumpled. He was out of options. The entire front-of-house staff had been canvassed. The chefs, the sommelier, the busboys. No one. Not a soul spoke Japanese. The reputation of the Gilded Compass was about to be irrevocably shattered by the city's most influential and notoriously unforgiving patron. From across the room, polishing a wine glass with a linen cloth until it squeaked, Sarah Jenkins watched the drama unfold. She was to all outward appearances just another part of the restaurant's impeccable yet invisible machinery. Her uniform was crisp, her dark hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun, and her expression was a carefully constructed mask of polite neutrality. She was 28, but the faint, weary lines around her eyes suggested she had lived a decade longer. For the past 3 years, she had been a ghost, a phantom of her former self, content to serve overpriced delicacies to people she once would have called her peers. Here she was anonymous. Here no one knew her name or the scandal that had sent her glittering career crashing down in a blaze of public humiliation. She was just Sarah, the quiet waitress who was always on time, never complained, and did her job with a detached, almost robotic efficiency. Her co-worker Jessica sidled up to her, pretending to inspect the arrangement of breadsticks. "Look at Dubois," she whispered, her eyes wide. "I think he's actually sweating through his tuxedo. Blackwood is going to eat him alive and not even leave a tip." Sarah didn't reply, her focus locked on the tableau at table 1. She felt a familiar, bitter taste rise in her throat. The arrogance, the power, the casual cruelty of men like Harrison Blackwood. She knew them well. She had worked for them, admired them, and ultimately been destroyed by one of them. The world of high-stakes corporate maneuvering was a world she had vowed to leave behind forever. It was a viper's nest, and she had been bitten badly. Blackwood made a sharp, dismissive gesture with his hand. "Leave me. Send me your owner's personal number. I will have this establishment's charter reviewed by morning. You have failed on a fundamental level." It was not a threat. It was a promise. Dubois, ashen-faced, could only nod and back away his retreat, as pathetic as his attempts to solve the problem. Blackwood turned to his lieutenants. "This is a catastrophe," he hissed, the first crack in his iron composure. "Old man Yoshida is a traditionalist of the highest order. This will be seen as the ultimate insult. He'll walk before the appetizers arrive. 2 years of work gone." Sterling cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can postpone Harrison claim a security concern on our end and look weak. Unprepared. No. We proceed. We will use the company translator and hope for the best security be damned. We have no other choice." He slammed his palm softly on the table, a gesture of pure, unadulterated frustration. Sarah watched her heart, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She could feel the ghost of her former life stirring within her. The life where she commanded boardrooms with her fluency, where she navigated the labyrinthine complexities of Japanese business etiquette with an artist's grace. The life before the betrayal, before Robert Vance had used her as a scapegoat to cover his own colossal failure, shattering her reputation and blacklisting her from every major corporation in the country. She had sought refuge in anonymity, in the simple, uncomplicated world of taking orders and clearing plates. To reveal her skills now would be to open a door to that past, to invite the scrutiny and pain she had worked so hard to escape. It was reckless. It was insane. And yet, as she watched Harrison Blackwood, a man who represented everything she had grown to despise, she saw something else beyond the anger. She saw desperation. She saw the same look of a man on a precipice that she had once seen in her own mirror. Jessica nudged her. "Come on, let's get the service station restocked before he decides to fire the entire waitstaff for fun." But Sarah didn't move. She placed the wine glass down on the polished bar with a soft, decisive click. The sound was barely audible, but for her it was a gavel striking down on 3 years of hiding. She straightened her spine, took a deep, steadying breath, and began to walk towards table 1. "What are you doing?" Jessica hissed, aghast. "Sarah, don't, he'll kill you." Sarah didn't look back. Every step on that silent crimson carpet was a step out of the shadows. The eyes of Mr. Sterling and Mr. Finch widened in alarm as she approached. Mr. Dubois, who was hovering near the kitchens, saw her and made a frantic stop gesture. But Sarah's gaze was fixed solely on the formidable man at the head of the table. She stopped a respectful 3 feet away, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture impeccable. Harrison Blackwood looked up, his expression one of pure, venomous irritation. "What is it?" He snapped, his voice a whip crack. "Did you not hear me? I want to be left alone." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Her own voice, when it came, was quiet, clear, and utterly calm. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwood," she said. "I believe I may be of some assistance." The air around table 1 seemed to crystallize. For a moment, no one moved. Mr. Sterling and Mr. Finch stared at Sarah as if she had just sprouted a second head. Mr. Dubois, halfway across the room, looked like he was having an aneurysm. A waitress, a nameless server, had just voluntarily walked into the lion's den and addressed the lion directly. Harrison Blackwood's eyes, cold and sharp as chips of ice, raked over her. He saw a simple uniform, a plain face, hands that were clean but bore the subtle signs of hard work. He saw nothing of importance, nothing to warrant this insane interruption. "Assistance," he repeated the word, dripping with derision. "And how precisely do you imagine you can be of assistance? Is there a problem with the water? Are the bread rolls not to your liking?" His sarcasm was a bludgeon designed to humiliate and dismiss. Sarah felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but refused to let it show. She had faced down board members who would make Blackwood look like a kindly grandfather. She held her ground. "No, sir," she said, her tone even. "I am referring to your dilemma regarding your upcoming meeting. You require a fluent Japanese speaker. I can provide that service." A beat of stunned silence. Then Mr. Finch let out a short, incredulous bark of a laugh, which he quickly smothered when Blackwood shot him a look that could curdle milk. Blackwood leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "You," he said, drawing the word out. "A waitress. You speak Japanese." It was not a question, it was an accusation. "Yes, sir. I do." And how well he pressed his voice, laced with skepticism. "Did you take a class in college? Can you ask where the library is and order a bowl of ramen?" The condescension was thick, but Sarah recognized the tactic. He was testing her composure, looking for any sign of weakness or deception. She had been subjected to this line of questioning 100 times in her past life. "I am fluent, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her voice unwavering. "In both conversational and business contexts, including the nuances of keigo, the honorific form essential for formal negotiations. I can also read and write at a professional level. The mention of keigo was a strategic move. It was a shibboleth, a password that separated the tourists from the true practitioners of the language." A flicker of something surprise intrigue passed through Blackwood's cold eyes. He studied her more closely now, his gaze intense and analytical. "Where did you learn?" he demanded. This was the dangerous part. The truth was a landmine. "I worked as a lead translator and cultural liaison for a multinational corporation for 5 years," she said, carefully editing her history. "My primary focus was on facilitating M&A deals with Japanese firms." Mr. Sterling, the older of the two executives, leaned in to whisper to his boss, "Harrison, this is absurd. We can't possibly entrust this to a random restaurant employee. The risk is astronomical. We have no idea who she is." Blackwood waved a hand for silence, his eyes still locked on Sarah. He saw her composure, the steady, direct way she met his gaze. He saw the subtle confidence in her posture. It was out of place. It didn't belong to a waitress. It belonged to someone who was accustomed to pressure, to being in rooms like this one, but on the other side of the table. A multinational corporation, Blackwood mused aloud. And yet you are here, serving canapés. A rather dramatic career change. Why, the question was a scalpel aimed right at the heart of her carefully constructed anonymity. The old wound throbbed with a familiar ache. The public accusation, the sham investigation, the quiet, blacklisting that had followed. Robert Vance's smug face flashed in her mind's eye. She chose her words with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. I chose to leave the corporate world, sir, for personal reasons. It was a deflection, and he knew it. A sardonic smile touched the corner of his lips. I see. Personal reasons. The great graveyard of promising careers. He fell silent for a long moment, tapping a single finger on the table. The fate of his $50 billion deal hung in the balance, and his only potential lifeline was a waitress with a mysterious past and an inexplicable skill set. To his left, his trusted advisors were shaking their heads, almost imperceptibly. To his right, Mr. Dubois was frantically making hand signals for her to retreat. The entire restaurant staff, frozen in place, watched the surreal encounter. Sarah felt a bead of sweat trickle down her back. Perhaps this had been a mistake. She had exposed herself for a man who deserved no help, for a world that had chewed her up and spat her out. Her desire to hide was warring with a deeper, long-dormant instinct, the refusal to let a problem go, unsolved the professional pride she thought she had buried. Finally, Blackwood came to a decision. He leaned back in his chair, a king on his throne, and issued his challenge. His next words were not in English. He spoke in flawless formal Japanese, his voice cutting through the air with a new kind of authority. Let's see what you're made of. Do you understand just how important this meeting is? The sudden shift in language was a shockwave. Sterling and Finch were completely lost. Dubois' jaw dropped. The game had changed. This was no longer a simple inquiry. It was an oral examination, a trial by fire. Sarah didn't hesitate. The language flowed from her as naturally as breathing a part of her she had suppressed for so long that its release was almost a relief. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect that was as ingrained in her as the words themselves. Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I understand that the success of this meeting is of the utmost importance to the future of your company. It would be my greatest honor if my humble abilities could be of service. Her pronunciation was perfect. Her use of the honorific Sama for his name and the humble form for her own abilities was textbook. It was the language of a seasoned professional, not a hobbyist. Blackwood's eyebrows shot up. The surprise on his face was genuine and profound. He had expected at best a clumsy, heavily accented response. What he got was the polished, deferential language of a Tokyo boardroom. He continued to press her switching topics, his questions becoming more complex, testing her vocabulary on finance, logistics, and corporate law. He spoke about leveraged buyouts, intellectual property rights, and the intricacies of Japanese corporate governance. He was not just testing her language, he was testing her intelligence, her understanding of his world. Sarah answered every question flawlessly. She moved from financial jargon to subtle cultural idioms without missing a beat. It was a masterful performance, a symphony of language and intellect that left Blackwood's two executives utterly bewildered. They could only watch their expressions a mixture of awe and confusion as this quiet waitress engaged their formidable boss in a high-level discussion they couldn't begin to comprehend. After a solid 5 minutes of this intense grilling, Blackwood fell silent again. He stared at Sarah, but but his gaze was different now. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating assessment. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at an asset, a powerful, unexpected, and utterly inexplicable asset. He switched back to English. "What is your name, Sarah Jenkins, sir?" "Well, Miss Jenkins Harrison Blackwood," said a strange, almost predatory gleam in his eyes. "It seems you have a choice to make. You can go back to polishing glasses for the rest of the evening, or you can sit down at this table and help me close the biggest deal of my life. If we succeed, I will pay you a fee of $100,000. If we fail, you will leave here and never speak of this again. Your guests will be here in 15 minutes. The offer was staggering absurd. $100,000 for a few hours of work. But it wasn't the money that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. It was the opportunity, the chance just for one night to be who she used to be, the chance to step back into the arena to prove to herself that the woman she had been was not truly dead, only sleeping. Jessica was watching from the bar, her face pale with terror and disbelief. Mr. Dubois was wringing his hands, his professional world turned completely upside down. Sarah looked at Harrison Blackwood, the man who held her past and a potential future in his hands. She gave a single decisive nod. "I will require a change of clothes," she said, "and a full briefing document on the Yoshida Corporation's key personnel and negotiating sticking points. You have 10 minutes. Harrison Blackwood was not a man easily impressed. He had dined with presidents, negotiated against warlords, and built an empire from the ground up through sheer force of will. But as he watched Sarah Jenkins issue her terms, her voice steady and her eyes clear, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine astonishment. She hadn't just accepted his offer. She had made a counter-demand, asserting her professionalism in a situation where she held almost no power. Finch Blackwood commanded without taking his eyes off Sarah. "My briefcase. The Yoshida file. Now." He then turned to the petrified Mr. Dubois. "Find this woman an appropriate suit. My personal tailor has a standing account at the boutique in the lobby. Spare no expense and do it in 5 minutes." The entire restaurant snapped into a frenzy of motion. Finch fumbled with the locks on a heavy leather briefcase, while Dubois practically sprinted towards the lobby, shouting into his phone. Sterling just stared slack-jawed. The world had tilted on its axis. Sarah was whisked away to a private powder room, where a frantic hotel manager and 2 assistants from the lobby's high-end boutique met her. Within minutes, her server's uniform was replaced by a perfectly tailored dark navy pantsuit, a simple silk shell, and low, elegant heels. The fit was impeccable, transforming her from an invisible waitress into a figure of quiet authority. As she looked at her reflection in the gilded mirror, she felt a strange sense of temporal dislocation. The face was the same, but the woman staring back was someone she hadn't seen in 3 years. She was no longer Sarah the waitress. She was Sarah Jenkins' corporate liaison. The ghost had put on flesh. When she returned to the private dining room, Finch had a tablet waiting for her. The screen was filled with the dense, confidential briefing document on the Yoshida merger. As she scanned the pages, her mind, long accustomed to the simple calculus of food orders and table numbers, kicked into a higher gear. The familiar terminology, the complex financial models, the nuanced profiles of the Japanese executives. It was like a dormant muscle, suddenly remembering its strength. Blackwood watched her, his expression unreadable. "The CEO, Mr. Kenji Yoshida, is 78, he said, his voice now that of a collaborator, not an interrogator. Old school. He built the company with his bare hands. He values honor, loyalty, and tradition above profit. His son Hiroshi is the heir apparent. He's sharp, Western educated, and eager to modernize. They often clash. The sticking point is the retention of their senior research and development team in Kyoto. Yoshida sees them as family. I see them as a redundant expense. Sarah absorbed the information, her eyes flying across the screen. Names, figures, potential friction points. She was building a mental map of the negotiation landscape. Mr. Yoshida's history is in artisan craftsmanship before he moved into technology, correct? She asked, not looking up from the tablet. His first company made lacquered boxes. Blackwood nodded a hint of surprise in his gesture. That's in the deep dive appendix. How did you get there so fast? It's a key detail, Sarah said simply. His entire business philosophy is likely rooted in the concept of the art and spirit of making things. He won't see his R&D team as a line item on a budget. He'll see them as the soul of his creation. Attacking that directly is an insult. We'll need to frame the merger as a way to preserve and elevate that soul, not discard it. Sterling and Finch exchanged a look of disbelief. In 5 minutes, this waitress had absorbed more and offered a more insightful strategic analysis than their entire team had in 5 months. Blackwood allowed himself a small, thin smile. And how do you suggest we do that? We emphasize legacy. We propose turning the Kyoto facility into a global center for innovation, jointly branded. We give it a new name, more funding, and frame it as the crown jewel of the new combined entity. It's not a redundancy. It's the foundation of our shared future. You don't fire the artisans. You give them a bigger palace to work in. Before Blackwood could respond, the doors to the private room opened, and Mr. Dubois, looking immensely relieved, announced the arrival of the Japanese delegation. An elderly, impeccably dressed Japanese man with a serene face and watchful eyes entered, flanked by a younger, sharper-looking man in a modern suit and 2 other associates. This was Kenji Yoshida and his son Hiroshi. Blackwood rose the perfect host. As introductions were made in English, Sarah stood slightly behind, and to the side of Blackwood, her position indicating her role as an advisor, not a principal. Old Mr. Yoshida's eyes flickered towards her, a silent question in his gaze. Blackwood gestured towards her. "This is Ms. Jenkins," he said in English, "my trusted advisor and a key member of my team for this venture." The lie was seamless. Sarah inclined her head respectfully. Then, as planned, Blackwood switched to Japanese to welcome them. It was then that Sarah truly began to work. She listened not just to the words, but to the silences between them, to the subtle inflections and honorifics that carried the real meaning. The dinner began, and with it, a delicate dance of conversation. Blackwood, following Sarah's whispered cues, steered the topic away from business and towards art history and craftsmanship. He spoke of his admiration for Japanese ceramics, a detail Sarah had plucked from Yoshida's biography. He inquired about a specific temple in Kyoto, known for its gardens. Through it all, Sarah was his shadow, his guide. When Hiroshi asked a pointed question in English about market capitalization, Sarah would murmur the Japanese translation to Blackwood, along with a suggested, more culturally appropriate response. When old Mr. Yoshida told a long allegorical story about a bonsai tree, she would provide Blackwood with a real-time interpretation, explaining not just the literal meaning, but the underlying business metaphor about patience and growth. She was a ghost in the machine, utterly indispensable yet perfectly discreet. She noticed things Blackwood's team never would have, the way Mr. Yoshida placed his chopsticks down when the topic of layoffs was subtly hinted at, the slight tightening around Hiroshi's eyes when Blackwood mentioned his company's aggressive expansion strategy. During a lull in the conversation, as a course of delicate sashimi was served, Yoshida addressed Sarah directly in Japanese for the first time. Jenkins-san. He began, his voice gentle, but his eyes sharp. Ms. Jenkins, your Japanese is truly excellent. Where did you learn it? It was the same question Blackwood had asked, but from this man it felt different. Less like an interrogation, more like a genuine inquiry from a connoisseur. Sarah felt a pang of nostalgia. The question brought back a flood of memories she had long suppressed. The bustling streets of Tokyo, the scent of cherry blossoms in Ueno Park, the face of her mentor, Mr. Tanaka, a kind, wise executive who had taken her under his wing during her first posting in Japan. She bowed her head slightly. You are too kind, Mr. Yoshida. I was stationed in Tokyo for 5 years, working for a company called Global Vanguard Solutions. At the mention of the company name, a flicker of recognition crossed both Hiroshi's and his father's faces. Global Vanguard Solutions was a major player in their industry, a well-known competitor. But it was Hiroshi who leaned forward, a curious, almost predatory look on his face. He switched to English, a deliberate move to include the others at the table. Global Vanguard, he said, his English perfect. I know them well. They had a brilliant American translator a few years ago. A woman. She was the best in the business. Led the negotiations on the Aoyama Instruments merger. But she was involved in a major scandal. Something about leaking proprietary data on a project. What was it called? Project Nightingale, I believe. It cost them a fortune. She was fired, disgraced, vanished completely. Her name, it was Jenkins, Sarah Jenkins. The name dropped onto the table with the force of a physical blow. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Mr. Sterling and Mr. Finch froze their forks halfway to their mouths. Harrison Blackwood's head snapped towards Sarah. His face was a mask of thunderous fury and dawning horror. He hadn't just hired a waitress. He had brought a disgraced corporate pariah, a woman with a history of leaking sensitive information, into the most secure and important negotiation of his entire life. Sarah's blood ran cold. The past she had run from had just caught up to her in the most public and catastrophic way imaginable. She was exposed, her carefully buried shame laid bare for all to see. In the shocked, accusatory eyes of Harrison Blackwood, she saw her second chance and her life once again turning to ash. The silence in the room was a living entity, thick and suffocating. Every eye was on Sarah. Hiroshi Yoshida watched her with a look of shrewd curiosity, his father with one of deep, unreadable contemplation. Sterling and Finch looked at her with undisguised horror, as if she were a viper who had suddenly materialized on their dinner table. But the most terrifying gaze was Harrison Blackwood's. His face was a mask of cold, controlled rage. The trust he had tentatively extended had been shattered, replaced by the icy certainty of betrayal. Is this true? Blackwood's voice was dangerously low, a growl barely held in check. He didn't need an answer. The stricken look on Sarah's face was confession enough. Sarah felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The air in her lungs seemed to evaporate. The faces around the table blurred, and for a terrifying second, she was back in that soulless, glass-walled boardroom 3 years ago. She saw Robert Vance, her former boss, his face a picture of false sympathy, as he read the damning report he himself had fabricated. She heard the whispers of her colleagues, the ones who had praised her work one day and shunned her the next. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. She forced herself to meet Blackwood's gaze. Her voice, when it came, was a reedy whisper, a fragile thread in the crushing silence. Yes, my name is Sarah Jenkins. I used to work at Global Vanguard. And the scandal Blackwood pressed his words like chips of ice. Project Nightingale, the leaked data. Was that you? This was the moment. She could crumble, let the old lie consume her once more, or she could do what she had been too broken and too scared to do 3 years ago. She could fight back. A tiny defiant spark ignited in the ruins of her composure. She had nothing left to lose. Anonymity was already gone. She lifted her chin, her voice gaining a sliver of its former strength. I was accused of leaking the data. I was fired for it. But I didn't do it. Finch let out a contemptuous snort. Of course not. They never do. Be quiet, Finch. Blackwood snapped his glare, silencing the executive instantly. His focus remained entirely on Sarah. He was a predator, dissecting its prey, searching for any sign of deception. Explain. Sarah took a deep breath, the story she had locked away for years, finally clawing its way to the surface. Project Nightingale was a joint venture to develop a new type of biometric security software. It was my team's project. We were weeks from a breakthrough. The technology was revolutionary. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The memories were sharp and painful. The project was overseen by a senior vice president named Robert Vance. He was under immense pressure from the board to deliver results. He made a critical error. He rushed the final phase of testing, ignoring protocols to push for a faster launch. The core algorithm was unstable. He committed millions in pre-launch marketing based on a product that didn't work. She could see it all so clearly. Vance's panic, his frantic search for a scapegoat. When the algorithm failed a crucial internal audit, instead of admitting his mistake, he panicked. He needed a diversion, something to explain the catastrophic failure and the wasted capital. So he created one. Her eyes darted to Hiroshi Yoshida. The leaked data wasn't a leak at all. It was a fragment of obsolete code from an early prototype. Vance passed it to a low-level tech blogger, making it look like a major act of corporate espionage. Then he fabricated an electronic trail that led directly to my workstation. He knew my background, my fluency in Japanese. He built a narrative that I had been bought off by a rival Yakuza-affiliated tech firm. It was outlandish, but it was sensational. It shifted the entire focus from his incompetence to my supposed treason. Old Mr. Yoshida had set down his chopsticks and was listening with rapt attention, his ancient eyes missing nothing. Blackwood's expression was still hard as stone, but a new, intensely analytical light had entered his eyes. If you were innocent, why didn't you fight it? An accusation that's severe. You would have had legal recourse. The bitter truth settled heavily in Sarah's chest. Vance was clever. He offered me a choice. I could fight, endure a public, drawn-out legal battle that he, with the full backing of Global Vanguard's legal team, would almost certainly win. My name would be dragged through the mud for years, or I could sign a non-disclosure agreement, accept the quiet termination, and disappear. In exchange, he wouldn't press federal charges, and he would ensure my mentor, Mr. Tanaka, the man who had taught me everything, would be allowed to retire with his full pension. Mr. Tanaka was very ill at the time. A public scandal would have destroyed him and his legacy. Vance used my loyalty against me. She finally finished her throat raw. The story was out of poison, drawn from a festering wound. She felt strangely light, hollowed out. She had expected looks of pity or disbelief. She had not expected what happened next. It was old Mr. Yoshida who broke the silence. He spoke in slow, deliberate Japanese, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that commanded the room. The man named Vance, I know that name, he said, his gaze sharp and penetrating. Sarah's head snapped up. Blackwood leaned forward instantly, translating for his non-Japanese-speaking executives in a low murmur. Mr. Yoshida continued, his eyes on Sarah. He is an aggressive, dishonorable man. Several years ago, he tried to sabotage a joint venture with our company. There was no honor in his methods. He then turned his gaze to Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, switching to perfect English. "The story this young woman tells, it has the ring of truth. A man who lacks honor in one dealing will lack it in all dealings. Robert Vance is not a trustworthy man." A bomb had gone off in the room, but it was one that cleared the smoke instead of creating it. Mr. Yoshida's words were a powerful vindication, a character reference from one of the most respected figures in their industry. Blackwood was silent for a long time. He looked from Mr. Yoshida's serene, knowing face to Sarah's pale, defiant one. He was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut was telling him something extraordinary. He had built his empire by recognizing patterns, by seeing the moves on the chessboard that others missed, and the pieces were starting to form a new, alarming picture. He turned to Sarah, his voice devoid of its earlier rage, now cold and dangerously precise. "This Robert Vance. Where is he now?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. She suddenly understood. The connections, the coincidences, they weren't coincidences at all. After his successful handling of the Nightingale crisis, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper, he was headhunted. He was seen as a man who could handle tough situations. He got a major promotion and a huge pay raise, where Blackwood repeated his voice like the cocking of a hammer. Sarah finally said the words that had been sitting like a stone in her stomach. "He is the Executive Vice President of European Operations for Blackwood Industries. He's worked for you for the last 18 months. The revelation hung in the air, monstrous and undeniable. The man who had destroyed Sarah's life was now one of Blackwood's most senior executives. The saboteur from Mr. Yoshida's past was inside his own walls. The failed Yoshida merger, the paranoia about leaks, the stalling negotiations, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The threat wasn't coming from the outside. The call was coming from inside the house. Harrison Blackwood's face became a thunderous mask. The $50 billion deal was not the only thing at stake anymore. His entire company had been compromised, and the key to understanding how the one person who knew Robert Vance's methods better than anyone was the disgraced waitress sitting right in front of him. The atmosphere in the room had undergone a seismic shift. The initial shock and accusation had evaporated, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of a conspiracy revealed. Harrison Blackwood was no longer looking at Sarah as a liability. He was looking at her as the key. Robert Vance, his own executive, was the serpent in his garden. Sterling Finch Blackwood commanded his voice, low and lethal. "Leave us." But Harrison Sterling began. "Now." The two executives, looking thoroughly rattled, rose and exited the room, leaving a strange new alliance at the table. The billionaire, the Japanese CEO, his son, and the waitress who had turned their world on its head. Blackwood's attention was now entirely on the present crisis. The Yoshida deal, he said, his mind working at lightning speed. "We've been stalled for 2 months. Every time we get close, there's a new complication. A permit mysteriously delayed, a story leaked to the financial press about regulatory hurdles, a key supply chain partner suddenly getting cold feet. Small things, but they add up. It's been a death by 1,000 cuts. Yoshida-sama was quite rightly beginning to doubt my firm's ability to execute." He looked at Mr. Yoshida. "I believed it was industrial espionage from a competitor. I never imagined the saboteur was on my own payroll." Hiroshi Yoshida spoke up, his tone sharp and analytical. "It makes perfect sense. Vance works for you, but perhaps someone is paying him more. Our biggest competitor, an aggressive European conglomerate, would pay handsomely to see this merger fail. If Vance could scuttle this deal, he would be a hero to them." Blackwood nodded grimly. Exactly. And he's been using the same methods he used on you, Ms. Jenkins. Fabricating obstacles, creating a narrative of failure, all to cover his own tracks. Sarah felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. The man who had ruined her life was still playing the same dirty games, only now on a global scale. The injustice of it, all of him thriving, while she languished in obscurity, burned in her gut. What was Vance's role in this negotiation? She asked her mind, slipping back into its old analytical groove. He oversees our European manufacturing hubs, Blackwood explained. A key part of the merger involves integrating Yoshida's EU distribution network with our plants. He's been the point man on all logistical assessments. He's had access to everything. Every shipping manifest, every regulatory filing, every financial projection. Then he knows exactly where to place the sand in the gears, Sarah concluded. He can create a dozen plausible reasons for delays, each one making your side look incompetent and making the Yoshida Corporation rightfully hesitant. It was old Mr. Yoshida who brought the conversation to its crux. He looked at Blackwood, then at Sarah. "This is a problem of trust, Blackwood-san," he said, in his wise, measured tone. "My company is my family. I cannot merge my family with a house that has such a man inside it. Before we can speak of mergers, you must first clean your house." The challenge was clear. The business deal was now secondary. This had become a matter of honor. Blackwood's jaw was set like concrete. "I will handle Vance. He will be ruined before sunrise." But that doesn't solve our immediate problem. You are here tonight to make a final decision. If you walk away now, even with this new information, the momentum is lost. Our competitors will smell blood in the water. The deal will die. He then turned his formidable gaze on Sarah. It was a look she had never expected to see from him, one of grudging respect, and more surprisingly, of need. "Ms. Jenkins," he began, his voice formal, "you are in a unique position. You understand Vance's methods. You understand the nuances of this negotiation. And it is clear you have earned the trust of Yoshida-sama in a way my own team has not managed in months." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I am not asking you to be a translator anymore. I am asking for your counsel. Help me navigate this. Help me prove to Yoshida-sama that my house, despite this infestation, is still strong and honorable. Help me save this deal tonight." He looked at her, then glanced at her simple, now discarded waitress uniform which a busboy had discreetly folded on a nearby chair. "This is not the life you were meant for. You know it, and I know it. Vance took your career. Here is a chance to take a piece of it back. Name your price. Not the 100,000 I offered earlier. Anything." The offer was breathtaking. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. A chance not just for money, but for something far more valuable: vindication. A chance to use the very skills Vance had tried to bury to undo the damage he was causing. But fear was a powerful current. To step back into this world even for one night was to risk everything. She had found a fragile peace in her quiet life. This was a world of monsters. She looked at Mr. Yoshida. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of encouragement, of belief. He had seen her honor, and he was acknowledging it. That small gesture was all it took. The spark of defiance in her belly roared into a flame. "I don't want your money, Mr. Blackwood, Sarah," said her voice ringing with a newfound clarity and strength. "I want something else. When this is over, I want you to give me all the evidence you have on Robert Vance. The evidence of his sabotage against you and any files you can unearth about his actions during Project Nightingale. I want the means to clear my name. Publicly." Blackwood didn't hesitate. "Done." And she added a glint of steel in her eyes. I want you to personally arrange a meeting between me and the board of Global Vanguard Solutions. I have a story I think they'll be very interested to hear." A slow, predatory smile spread across Harrison Blackwood's face. He was looking at a kindred spirit, someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't just success, but total and utter victory. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, extending a hand across the table, "I believe you and I are going to get along splendidly. Now tell me, the Kyoto R&D facility. My initial offer was to absorb 50% of the staff and offer severance to the rest. Based on what you know of Vance's tactics, where would he have attacked that proposal?" Sarah took his hand, the grip firm and decisive. The waitress was gone. The strategist had returned. He wouldn't have attacked it head-on, she said, her mind already racing. He would have gone after the supply chain for their rare earth minerals, creating a logistical bottleneck that makes the facility look like a financial black hole. He'd make you believe cutting it loose was your own brilliant idea. "We need to see the latest European logistics report," he filed. "I guarantee you the answer is in there." Blackwood was already pulling out his phone, dialing a secure line to his chief of technology in London. "Get me Vance's latest logistics report for the Yoshida merger. Break any encryption necessary. I want it on my tablet in 60 seconds. And get a team ready. We're going house cleaning." The dinner was no longer a negotiation between two companies. It had become a war council. And Sarah Jenkins, the waitress nobody knew, was now leading the charge. With a new purpose, the table transformed into a war council. As they awaited the files on Vance, Sarah guided Blackwood, suggesting he ask Mr. Yoshida about his collection of antique pens. The question worked wonders, softening the old CEO and showing that Blackwood saw the man, not just the deal. This small gesture, a masterstroke of cultural empathy, reset the tone of the entire evening. Moments later, the encrypted logistics report arrived on Blackwood's tablet. Sarah moved to his side, and together they analyzed the document. It was a masterpiece of deception, filled with fabricated data, designed to make the Kyoto R&D facility look like a financial black hole. To an untrained eye, it was convincing. But to Sarah, it was an open book. "This is a lie," she whispered, pointing to a footnote. "He's citing an agricultural tariff, not one for rare earth minerals. And this port strike he mentions, the source is a blog registered to a shell corporation he likely controls. He's creating phantom problems to justify cutting the facility." Blackwood's face was grim. He now had the proof, but revealing it would expose his company's weakness. He needed to dismantle Vance's case without admitting to the internal treason. He looked to Sarah, who gave a single confident nod. She stood addressing the Yoshidas in flawless Japanese. "We have reviewed the preliminary logistics assessments," she began, her voice calm and authoritative. "We treated them as a stress test, a look at the worst-case scenarios. And we have concluded that this conservative model does not do justice to the strength of this partnership." She masterfully dismantled Vance's every point, not as lies, but as hypothetical risks they had already overcome. She exposed his fabrications as minor concerns easily mitigated by the combined power of their two companies. She turned a narrative of sabotage into a story of resilience. Therefore, she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction, far from being a liability. The Kyoto facility is the unassailable core of our new venture. She turned to Blackwood, who played his part perfectly. "Mr. Blackwood has authorized me to present a new offer. We will not be cutting any staff. Instead, Blackwood Industries will invest an additional $200 million to expand the facility into the Yoshida Blackwood Global Research Institute. It will be the soul of our new company." The offer was breathtaking. It wasn't just what Mr. Yoshida wanted. It was a bigger, more honorable version of his own dream. The old man rose, his eyes shining, and bowed deeply to Blackwood. "You have a clean house," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He then turned to Sarah, bowing again. "And you have a wise and honorable advisor. You have saved the soul of this meeting. The merger is agreed." The rest of the dinner was a celebration. Once the Yoshidas departed their final words, a heartfelt thanks to Sarah for saving the soul of the meeting, Blackwood turned his attention to the reckoning. His phone calls were swift and lethal. Within minutes, Robert Vance's digital life in London was locked down and his office sealed. "Tell him Sarah Jenkins says hello." Blackwood instructed his head of security, a chilling promise of the retribution to come. He then fulfilled his own promise, arranging a priority meeting for Sarah with the board of her former company. "They are eager to hear what you have to say." He noted his power, clearing a path for her vindication. Looking at Sarah amidst the opulence of the now empty room, he didn't offer a reward. He offered a restoration. "That waitress uniform is the last one you'll ever wear. I'm creating a new position, Chief Strategy Officer, reporting directly to me. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden." He named a staggering salary, but the true prize was the absolute reclamation of her former life. Tears of profound relief filled Sarah's eyes. She had lost everything to a lie, and now the truth was giving it all back and more. She accepted with one final condition. "I want to be on the video call when you fire him. I want him to see my face." A genuine predatory smile touched Blackwood's lips. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The storm was over. Gazing out at the city skyline, Sarah was no longer a waitress in the shadows, but a woman who had stepped back into the light to claim her own dawn. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that our past doesn't define our future, and that the skills we possess can never truly be taken from us. In the most unexpected of places, under the most intense pressure, her true self was not just revealed, but reborn stronger and more resilient than ever. It shows that sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as insurmountable crises, and that a single voice speaking the truth can be more powerful than a billion-dollar empire. What do you think was the most pivotal moment in her comeback? Was it her decision to step forward, her confrontation of the past, or the strategic genius she displayed at the table? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, intellect, and ultimate vindication moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Thank you for listening.